Tonight on Mississippi Insight, we turn our attention to the race for president, the Iowa Caucus, the long wait for results, and who has the early edge going into New Hampshire. One candidate is skipping both those early states, but Michael Bloomberg is paying plenty of attention to Mississippi. We talk with Bloomberg's state director about how the former New York mayor can appeal to voters here in the Magnolia State. But we begin with the race for the White House and what we've learned from Iowa. Joining us is Dr. Nathan Shrader from Millsaps College. And it looks like Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are the big winners there. What do you make of how things turned out in Iowa?
Well, it does look like they're the big winners, but for different reasons. Pete Buttigieg in the polls, he had been kind of in the 3rd through 5th place slots in the polling up until the election, and Joe Biden was in a much stronger position. In fact, he was leading Iowa not that long ago. And so to see where Pete Buttigieg may finish with the most delegates, it's going to be very close between those two. I think it was a very, very good showing for him. And if you look at the number of the counties, he overperformed in some counties where he was not expected to do well. But I say one thing about Bernie Sanders, and I think you can't take away anything from how well he did. But if you go back 4 years, Bernie Sanders got 49.6% of the vote in Iowa, or the delegates in Iowa. Even though he finished somewhere in the top 2, he's still only at about 27%, 28% of the delegates. So there's a difference between a two-way race 4 years ago and the 12-way race now. But Bernie Sanders did lose votes from his last effort in that state.
What happened to Joe Biden?
I think it became it seems as if the other candidates were a little more aggressive. Joe Biden's been running a campaign that I've called it the Mr. Nice Guy campaign. And, he's been projecting himself as the kinder, gentler alternative to Donald Trump. And you have some of the other candidates like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Michael Bloomberg now kind of punching at Trump directly. Well, Joe Biden was sort of running this is a positive race about me and that I'm a nice person in contrast to the president. And I just don't think that worked with voters who are in the Democratic primary and caucus process really ready for a change.
Talk about the mess of the Iowa caucus. And what does that say for the Democratic Party?
Well, one could not replicate this if they tried to. If you're trying to come up with a bigger mess in politics. This was, again, not a malfunction on the part of the state of Iowa or the Secretary of State. This lies on the shoulders of the party because the party runs the caucuses. For them to have been so negligent in paying attention to the details of how this new program or app that they're using worked in run-up to one of the most important caucuses in a generation, it's just unfathomable to me that we got to this point. And so what it does is a couple of things. It undermines voters' respect for the integrity of that process, because they see, well, I took my time out of my schedule to go caucus, and I spent, in some cases, 3 hours in my caucus room. And here we are, we still don't have verifiable final results. But the other thing it does is, unfortunately, for the two top candidates, Sanders and Buttigieg, it undermines their victory. Because now everybody's still talking about the dysfunction of the Iowa Democratic Party and how it ran the election, and not, well, here are two candidates who worked hard and emerged in the top 2.
Will it impact whether Iowa is first in future elections, or where does that stand?
I have a very good feeling that we'll see a change in the lineup next time of who goes first. And here, Iowa may still be near the top. But here's my prediction, if I want to do that this far out, Iowa will not, they will be forced, or at least convinced, to hold a traditional primary and not a caucus. A traditional primary that is much like what we do here in Mississippi and in most other states.
It's been a good week for the president. With the Iowa issues, he gave the State of the Union. He also was acquitted in the impeachment, and his poll numbers are around 49%.
Right.
Are Democrats in trouble?
Well, I think it's too soon to say they're in trouble, but they have to get their house in order. Right now, the public is looking. Donald Trump scores the lowest in terms of his polling when it comes to questions about kind of his competence, his ability to do the job. There are other areas like the economy where he does well. Democrats can't afford to have too many blunders like this, because it then calls into question, well, they're saying the president is inept. Or can't handle the job. Well, they can't even run their primary. How are they going to run the country? So that they have to deal with this. The other thing they still have are competing factions within the party wrestling for control with the nomination now, with Sanders and Warren on the the liberal or progressive wing, Klobuchar, Biden, and Buttigieg kind of wrestling for the middle ground. And Mike Bloomberg, because he has enough money, he's got his foot in both camps. Michael Bloomberg is, I think, his record as a moderate mayor, but he is running, a campaign about gun safety and gun control, climate change. Those aren't traditional moderate issues. So he's able to play to both factions of the party right now.
Looking forward to New Hampshire. What do you see happening there, and who has the edge in New Hampshire right now?
So right now, I'd say Bernie Sanders does. A new Suffolk University poll today showed Bernie Sanders, his lead is something like 7 or 8 points over Pete Buttigieg. It was Joe Biden in that slot just a couple of days ago. So Pete Buttigieg has leapfrogged Joe Biden there. But I'd say Bernie Sanders has the advantage of being from the neighboring state. He won New Hampshire easily the last time. But you have the Elizabeth Warren factor too, because remember, as a Massachusetts senator, she's also from a neighboring state, but she's not been able to get the traction that Sanders has. And in fact, I think he's leading her by about 15 points right now as the two nearest senators that are in that race.
You went to New Hampshire with some students. What did you learn about New Hampshire voters, and what did you come out of that, away from that experience?
So here's something I came away with. This was the New England College's College Convention. This is held every 4 years, and it's aimed to undergraduate students to educate them about the electoral process. I got to present on the idea of ranked choice voting in elections, and we heard from about 10 to 12 candidates here. One of the things I learned from talking to New Hampshire voters in person is that they are diehard civic engagement types. These are people who, one voter that I spoke with had said, well, I've only met each of the candidates I'm interested in once or twice. I'm not quite ready to make up my mind yet. They'll go to meet every candidate and then study them and decide, here's my choice. So I actually would say that had led me to believe that the polling out of New Hampshire until right now at the end, the last week, it may not have been as reliable because voters there are still engaging with all the candidates. They weren't committing to them. But this convention was very interesting because it allowed town hall meeting formats for any candidates, the presidential candidates who wanted to come address this group of 500 student activists. And so it was especially meaningful, I think, to see students, many of which were not from that area, seeing New Hampshire politics up close for the first time.
Michael Bloomberg is skipping the early primaries, focusing really on Super Tuesday and then our primary on March 10th. His strategy, he's putting a lot of money into Mississippi right now. Really the only candidate spending having some organization here. His strategy and his efforts to put money in Mississippi, how important is Mississippi going to be in the Democratic primary, and where do you see that going? His strategy, do you think that's going to work?
Well, I was thinking about this the other day when the Iowa results, we were waiting for them to trickle in, and one of the reporters on CNN reminded us, remember, there are 40 delegates at stake, or 41 delegates at stake. And then I remember, well, Mississippi has 39. So if you think about the weight of what these votes count for, Mississippi's votes will count for something this year. In particular because we may have a very tight delegate race down to the wire. So Mississippi voters need to know that their participation in the March 10th primary is critical because it could have an impact on the final delegate count. Bloomberg's strategy, it's a gamble. Rarely do candidates make it very far if they elect to skip the first couple of states like Rudy Giuliani did in 2008. But Bloomberg, there's something different about Bloomberg. He has the funds and the resources to jump ahead of those states and spend that time in Super Tuesday states and then the March 10th states. And
what would the president need to do he has some momentum going right now,
he does.
To maintain that momentum?
The president has to, let me put it in, since spring training's coming, put it in baseball terminology. The president won the 2016 election by throwing the perfect game. He won all the states he absolutely needed to win in 2016 to become president. If you think of this in baseball terms, it's hard for any pitcher to throw back-to-back perfect games. Donald Trump has to pitch the perfect game a second time. And that's why I still think, despite his positive poll numbers and the benefits of some of the news cycle lately for him, I still think he has the harder task than the Democrat does right now, because he's got to win every one of those states. There's no room for error whatsoever for Donald Trump in a general election. But I would say there's one thing Donald Trump is rooting for: Donald Trump desperately wants to face Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders, I think, would allow Donald Trump's campaign to throw the perfect game a second time.
Mm-hmm. So that's the one candidate he would like to go against.
I think there's nothing that Donald Trump would like more than to go against Bernie Sanders. And I actually would say Trump is very strategic. And if you notice on Twitter, on Iowa Caucus night, he was talking about, oh, poor Bernie, they're out to get Bernie again. He's trying to gin up sympathy for Bernie. He really wants to run against Bernie Sanders. He sees that as his most competitive matchup, or the least competitive matchup, where he would have the best chance of winning all those key states again.
Who does he not want to run against?
I would say your Biden, Bloomberg, Klobuchar, a candidate like that who would have broader appeal in the suburbs, broader appeal in the middle that could unite the left and the center, where Bernie Sanders is going to have a very hard time, say, in the more moderate suburbs, winning over those voters and independents. And the Trump campaign, they know that. And it's not that they need to get all those folks out to vote for Donald Trump. They'd be content with them not voting, and they may not like Trump, but they're going to hear the messages from Sanders that are going to repel them from coming to vote at all, perhaps. And so Trump, they either want to demobilize those voters or try to persuade them, and Bernie Sanders gives him the best option there.
Let's talk about the Senate race here. With Mike Espy and Cindy Hyde-Smith, round two here.
Round two.
She's now the incumbent senator.
Yeah.
Who has the edge? Does she have the edge in round two now?
I think she has the edge because of the incumbency advantage, and we've seen for decades, 90% incumbency retention rates, re-election rates. But the polling that we released through the Millsaps College Chisholm Strategy State of the State survey 2 weeks ago showed that her approval rate she's just slightly higher in the approval than disapproval number, but it's low for an incumbent seeking re-election. So she's got some work to do. And interestingly enough, the two groups of voters who are sort of up in the air on her, she's got the strong Republicans, those who are the most hardline Republicans, they're for her. Democrats are for Espy. That was clear in the polling. But she is lagging where other Republicans tend to be in the Republican leaners. And some of the independents, that they're not quite sold on either candidate yet. And those are the ones who I think are still taking a look. Mm-hmm. But she's aided by the fact that Donald Trump is at the top of the ticket.
Talk about your Chisholm poll. When it comes to president, what kind of candidate are they looking for out of your Chisholm poll? What are they looking for, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican?
Right. So we asked primarily. So the first revealing thing about this poll was that Mississippi voters right now, for the last couple of years, our polls have revealed infrastructure, roads, bridges. Those are over and over and over again the issues that matter the most. Right now, it's healthcare and access to affordable healthcare options. We found that it was something about 80% of Mississippians report that they are worried about whether they and their family can afford out-of-pocket healthcare expenses in the coming year. That's an astronomically high number. And Cindy Hyde-Smith has a vulnerability there, as she's on the record for wanting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And the other thing we found is that over 60% of Mississippians want to expand the Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, which is again that's a position that runs counter to Donald Trump's position, Tate Reeves' position, Cindy Hyde-Smith's position. So there's room for, say, the Espy campaign or the Democrats to harness those issues, because she's simply on an unpopular side of the issue that's the most important to voters here right now.
Do you expect this to be a close race in the fall when it comes to the Senate race?
Well, it was the closest Senate race we'd had in, 2 decades the last time around. I think it depends on two things. It depends on whether Donald Trump being at the top of the ticket is enough to just sweep Cindy Hyde-Smith to victory, no matter what, right? That's one consideration. The other thing is, though, can the Espy campaign make inroads with enough soft Republicans and independents to even though they may vote for Donald Trump for president, would they be willing to split their ballot and vote for Mike Espy in the race. And SB also, by the way, there's a 3-way Democratic primary. So he's got to get through that primary and then on to Cindy Hyde-Smith, who's unopposed.
Interesting time.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Nathan Shrader, Millsaps College, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll be right back.
The Mississippi primary is just a month away, and one Democratic candidate for president has been very visible in this state. Former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg has been spending big bucks on TV ads right here. Pam Shaw is with Michael Bloomberg's campaign. Just to start off, how much money has he spent here so far?
I don't know that answer. What I do know is that he was determined to play across this country. And so he's not taking any of the states for granted. Mississippi is a very small state. We only have 31 delegates, and typically both Democratic presidential candidates don't play here. He decided, listen, I want the people in Mississippi to know who I am, and so he has big presence on TV, as you just noted, on radio, and we're getting ready to do some newspaper advertisement. He is not taking Mississippi for granted. He's saying to the people in Mississippi, on March 10th, when you go to the primary, I want your vote.
Usually Mississippi is a flyover state for both Republicans and Democrats. Some Republicans come here just to shore up the vote. But the big news out of the Democratic Party is the Democratic Caucus is, at this point, we don't have the results from that. But as a member of the Democratic Party, as a campaign that's in the campaign for the Democratic nomination, does it give you pause to see that the DNC isn't quite have the answers at this moment?
Well, I think that a part of the Bloomberg strategy was not to play in the early states. He said publicly that, the first 2 early states don't look like America. They're not as diverse as the rest of the country is. So I think that it has come out muddled out of last night's caucus is absolutely something we expected and we're planning for. So across the country, we have people in Mississippi, we have what we call our post-caucus plan. And what we're doing is saying, okay, to the people, here, this is where you come if you want a yard sign, this is where you want your t-shirts. We're making phone calls, we're knocking on doors, we're doing all those things to tell the Mike Bloomberg story and localize it in a way that says to people, we don't want the decision made about who would be the Democratic nominee very early in the process. We want to hear from all of the candidates, and we want them to come into our community and ask for our votes, which is what he's been doing.
What's the risk associated with that? I know it's been forever. You go to Iowa, you go to New Hampshire, that's been the formula for getting the nomination. What's the risk?
So, he is upending the way we have done politics in this country in a way that's, well, I think all of us would say, things needed to change. And so we've seen it change incrementally over the last number of years. I think he's just kind of said, listen, I got a case to make. Let me make that case in the public. And I think people will appreciate that. I think people look at what happened 4 years ago and are not thrilled clearly with the outcome, but also with the tension between the one who got the most popular votes and where the electoral votes were. And so people are saying, wait a minute, I see how all of those votes count in all of those places. And so let's do something in all of those places.
And after the early states, you did have Super Tuesday.
Super Tuesday.
Your Mayor Bloomberg is banking on running up the delegate count on that day.
Absolutely.
But traditionally, it's usually been a shoring up of the nomination of getting all the delegates. So you try to throw a pin into that. Absolutely.
And what we saw from last night is, it's not us because we weren't weren't there, but people are saying, no, and I think when you look at, Super Tuesday, how Super Tuesday has changed in terms of the number of people there that you have the votes that are coming, the next 4, you have Nevada and South Carolina, and then in Mississippi, a week after Super Tuesday, that's when we come into play. And I suspect that at that point, it still won't be decided, that we have the process playing out a little bit further, and that people will get a chance, and the question for them is, who do we want to be the Democratic nominee? who do we want to go out and vote for in November? And I think that's the case that Mike Bloomberg has been making all along, that on issues that are supremely important to people, particularly people of color, right? People of black folk, he's saying, okay, you know, I want y'all to check out my Greenwood initiative and talking about creating generational wealth in the African American community. People I know like that, right? I know people are saying healthcare needs to change. In a place like Mississippi, the path we're on is not working for the masses of the people. And so the masses of the people say, I want something different. And I want the country to go in a different direction. And Mike Bloomberg is making the case in Mississippi by the investment that he's made here, right? We have a full complement of team with people knocking on doors, making phone calls every day, and I want people to stay tuned. In the next 3 weeks, we're gonna be opening in the next week, we're gonna be opening 3 offices across the state so folk can come in and get information.
Reminder, if you missed this or any other episode of Mississippi Insight, go to our website. It's WJTV.com. For Gerald Harris, I'm Byron Brown. We'll see you back here again next Saturday. Until then, make it a good night.